I came home from the hospital 3 days earlier than expected. My key wouldn't turn in the front door. At first, I thought the lock was damaged. Then the door opened from the inside. My son stood there wearing the gray sweatshirt I had bought him for Christmas. He looked at the overnight bag in my hand, then at the hospital bracelet still around my wrist. "You weren't supposed to be back yet." I kept one hand on my cane. "What happened to the lock?" He didn't answer immediately. Behind him, I could see 2 cardboard boxes stacked in the hallway. One had my name written across the side. "Evan." He stepped outside and pulled the door almost closed behind him. Then he said it. "You don't live here anymore." For a few seconds, I thought the medication had affected my hearing. I was 67 years old. I had owned that house in western Pennsylvania for 31 years. My wife Linda and I had bought it when Evan was 4. I had replaced the roof, refinished the floors, rebuilt the back porch, and paid off the mortgage 12 years before she died. Now my son was standing on my front step, telling me I no longer lived there. I looked past him again. "Who changed the locks?" "I did." "Why?" "Because the house is mine now." He said it quietly. That made it worse. If he had shouted, I could have dismissed it as anger, but he sounded prepared. I adjusted my grip on the cane. "Open the door." "No. I just got out of the hospital." "I know. My medication is inside." "I packed it." He nodded toward the boxes. "I packed your clothes too." I stared at him. "You packed my belongings while I was having surgery?" "You were supposed to go to rehab for 2 weeks. The doctor cleared me to recover at home." Evan's jaw tightened. That wasn't the plan. I noticed our neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, watching from behind her curtains. Across the street, a man loading groceries into his trunk had stopped moving. Evan noticed them too. He lowered his voice. "Dad, don't make this embarrassing." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because he had changed the locks on my house while I was in the hospital, and he was worried I might embarrass him. "What document says this house belongs to you?" His expression changed slightly. That was the first sign that he hadn't expected me to ask the right question. "I have paperwork." "What paperwork?" "A transfer agreement." "I never signed a transfer agreement." "You did." "When?" 2 months ago." I shook my head. "No." He opened the door just enough to reach inside. Then he pulled out a white folder. He did not hand it to me. He held it against his chest. "You signed everything in front of a notary. I want to see it." "You'll get a copy." "I want to see it now." "Not standing here." I looked at the house. My house. The brass numbers Linda had picked out were still beside the door. The planter she used every spring was empty because I had gone into the hospital before buying flowers. Everything looked familiar. Only the lock was different. I took out my phone. Evan watched me unlock it. "Who are you calling?" "The police." His face hardened. "Dad, this is a civil matter. You've already rehearsed that sentence." He said nothing. I called anyway. The dispatcher asked whether anyone was in immediate danger. "No," I said. "My son changed the locks on my house while I was in the hospital and is refusing to let me inside." Evan turned away. The dispatcher said an officer would come. I thanked her and ended the call. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did." "You're making this worse." "No, I'm making a record." That shut him up. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into the driveway. The officer was younger than Evan. He introduced himself as Officer Mills and asked us both to explain. I kept mine simple. "I own the property. I came home from surgery. My key no longer works. My son refuses to let me inside." Officer Mills looked at Evan. Evan handed him the folder. "This shows ownership was transferred to me." The officer opened it and read the first page, then the second. He looked at my driver's license. "Mr. Mercer, is this your signature?" I leaned closer. The signature looked like mine. Not exactly, but close enough to make my stomach tighten. "I didn't sign that." Evan exhaled sharply. "Yes, you did." "Where?" "At your lawyer's office." "What lawyer?" He hesitated. "Mr. Ralston." I knew the name. Thomas Ralston had handled Linda's estate 6 years earlier. I had not spoken to him in almost 4 years. Officer Mills turned another page. "There's a notarization." "I understand what it looks like," I said. "I'm telling you, I did not sign it." The officer remained polite, but his tone changed. "This may need to be resolved in court. So he can keep me out? I can't determine ownership from the sidewalk. I have medication inside." Evan pointed to the boxes. "I packed all of it." Officer Mills looked at me. "Do you have somewhere you can stay tonight?" That question told me how the conversation would end. I looked at Evan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Yes," I said. "I'll find somewhere." The officer gave me an incident number and explained how to request the report. I wrote it down. Then I asked one more question. "Can you note that I disputed the signature today?" "Yes." "And that he refused access?" "Yes." "Good." Evan watched me place the paper in my wallet. He probably expected anger, maybe shouting, maybe a scene the neighbors would remember. Instead, I picked up the boxes. The first was heavier than it looked. Officer Mills offered to carry the second one to my truck. I let him. Before I left, Evan stepped closer. "Dad, once you calm down, we can talk." I put the box in the bed of my pickup. "I am calm? You don't understand what happened. Then you should have explained it before changing the locks." He looked toward the house. "It was necessary." "For whom?" He didn't answer. I climbed into the truck. My hip ached from standing too long, and the hospital bracelet scratched against the steering wheel. I drove to a motel 6 miles away and paid for 3 nights. Not because I thought the problem would be solved by then, because 3 nights was enough time to start. Inside the room, I opened the box marked with my name. Clothes, medication, a shaving kit, a framed photograph of Linda and me on our 25th anniversary. Evan had wrapped it in an old towel. Underneath it, I found a yellow envelope I had not seen in years. Linda's handwriting was across the front. For Daniel, house papers. Do not throw away. I sat on the edge of the bed. My name was Daniel Mercer. Linda had written that envelope before she died. I opened it carefully. Inside was a copy of our old family trust, and on the first page, in a paragraph I had forgotten existed, was one sentence my son had apparently never seen. "The family residence may not be transferred, pledged, or sold without the written consent of the surviving trustee." I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the motel mattress, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son locking me out of the house where I had raised him. At 3 in the morning, I turned on the bedside lamp and read Linda's trust again. Slowly. Line by line. When we signed it 27 years earlier, I remembered thinking it was overly cautious. Linda disagreed. She always planned for problems before they existed. "People don't always change overnight," she used to tell me. "Sometimes they change one small decision at a time." Back then, I thought she was talking about business. Now I wondered if she had been talking about family. At 8 o'clock, I called Thomas Ralston. His receptionist answered. "Good morning, Ralston and Pierce. This is Daniel Mercer. I need to speak with Tom." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer. Mr. Ralston retired last year." That stopped me. "Who took over his files?" "Attorney Megan Pierce." "Can she see me today?" "She has an opening at 11. "I'll be there." Before leaving the motel, I took photographs of everything Evan had packed. Every box, every label, every item. Then I photographed Linda's trust. The yellow envelope, the date written in her handwriting, the incident report Officer Mills had given me. I emailed every photo to myself. Then I uploaded copies to cloud storage. Linda had another habit. Never keep only one copy of anything important. I finally understood why. Attorney Megan Pierce looked younger than I expected. Probably early 40s, professional, calm. She didn't interrupt while I explained everything. Not once. When I finished, she folded her hands. "May I see the trust?" I handed it over. She read silently for almost 5 minutes. Then she looked at me. "This changes things." "How?" "It doesn't automatically prove your son committed fraud." "I know. But it raises a very important question." She tapped one paragraph. "If this trust was still active," it was, "then no transfer of the house could legally happen without the surviving trustee's written approval." "I never approved anything." She nodded. "That's why I need to see the transfer documents." I called Evan. He answered on the second ring. "What?" "I need a complete copy of every document you showed the officer." "You'll get it through my attorney." "You have an attorney?" "Yes." "When did that happen?" "A few weeks ago." "A few weeks before changing my locks?" Silence. "Who is your attorney?" "Just you'll find out." He hung up. Megan looked at me. "He hired a lawyer before locking you out." "Yes." "That tells me this wasn't an emotional decision." She closed Linda's trust. This was planned. Before I left, Megan asked one unexpected question. "Who was the notary?" "I don't know." She smiled slightly. "Let's find out." She opened the county database. Every licensed notary was listed there. She searched the name printed beneath the notarization. Her expression changed. "That's interesting." "What?" "This commission expired 8 months ago." I leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means the document claims to have been notarized." She pointed to the date. 3 months after this notary was no longer authorized. Neither of us spoke. It wasn't proof of fraud, not yet. But it was the first crack. Instead of feeling relieved, I felt something else. Disappointed. Because if the notarization was false, someone had helped my son. He hadn't done this alone. When I walked back to my truck, my phone buzzed. Mrs. Delaney, my neighbor. We had exchanged numbers years ago for emergencies. I answered. "Daniel?" "Yes." "I don't think I should be calling." "What's wrong?" "I saw movers at your house." My grip tightened around the phone. "When?" "This morning." "What were they doing?" "They loaded your dining room table." I closed my eyes. Linda's table. We had bought it after saving for almost a year. "Anything else?" "The grandfather clock." "My father's clock." "And your workshop cabinets." I looked at Megan through the office window. She immediately knew something had changed. Mrs. Delaney lowered her voice. "I thought you should know. You did the right thing." Before hanging up, she added one sentence. "Oh, and there was a woman there I've never seen before." A woman. She seemed to be telling everyone what to move. I drove straight toward the house. Not to confront Evan, to observe. Megan had been very clear. Don't create a scene. Don't step onto the property. Don't give anyone a reason to say you're acting irrationally. So I parked across the street. Mrs. Delaney waved me into her driveway. From there I had a clear view. A moving truck stood in front of my garage. 2 men carried furniture outside. Then I saw her. A woman in an expensive navy suit. Clipboard, tablet, giving instructions. I had never seen her before. She wasn't family. She wasn't a neighbor. She certainly wasn't a friend. She looked like someone managing an inventory. I took out my phone. Zoomed in, photographed her. The truck, the license plate, every piece of furniture leaving my house. Then something unexpected happened. She looked directly toward my truck, held my gaze for 2 seconds, and smiled. Not politely, confidently, as if she already knew exactly who I was. Then she reached into her purse, took out her phone, made one quick call. Less than a minute later, the front door opened, and my son came outside looking straight at me. My son walked across the front lawn with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. He stopped at the edge of the driveway. I stayed inside my truck. Mrs. Delaney quietly stepped back toward her porch, giving us privacy without actually leaving. Evan folded his arms. "You need to stop doing this." "Doing what?" "Watching the house. I've lived here for 31 years. You don't anymore." His answer didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how rehearsed it sounded, like he'd said it several times already. I looked toward the moving truck. My dining room table. He didn't answer. My father's clock. Still nothing. My workshop. "It's just furniture." I stared at him. "No. It belongs to the house." "No. It belongs to me." For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. I reached for my phone. "I'm recording this conversation." His eyes immediately dropped to the screen. "Seriously?" "Yes. You can't use that." "I don't know whether I can." I pressed record anyway, but I know I'll remember it correctly. He took a slow breath. "You packed everything yourself?" "No. You told me to. I was unconscious when you packed my house." His jaw tightened. "We're not doing this." "We already are." The woman in the navy suit walked toward us. She smiled before introducing herself. "Good afternoon." She held out a business card. I didn't take it. "My name is Allison Green." She waited. I still didn't move. "So?" "I'm assisting with the transition." "What transition?" "The property transition." "My property?" "Our client's property." I smiled for the first time since leaving the hospital. "Our client?" She realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. "There are other clients involved?" She recovered quickly. "I'm not discussing confidential matters." "I didn't ask you to." I finally accepted the business card. There was no company logo, just her name, a phone number, and 3 words: Residential Asset Services. I'd never heard of it. Megan answered on the second ring. "I need you to write something down." "I'm listening." I read Allison's name, then the company. Megan became quiet. "Don't leave." "I'm across the street." "Good." "I want photographs of every vehicle." "I already have them." "Excellent." "What is Residential Asset Services?" "I don't know yet, but I will." The movers continued carrying furniture outside. Then something caught my attention. They weren't loading random items. One man came out holding a gray fireproof document safe. My safe. Every important original document I owned was inside. Birth certificates, insurance policies, tax records, Linda's jewelry appraisal, the deed to our vacation cabin. Everything. I opened the truck door before I even realized it. "Stop." The mover froze. Allison stepped between us. "Sir, please don't interfere. That's my safe. It belongs to the property." "It absolutely does not." I looked directly at the mover. "Who hired your company?" He glanced nervously at Allison. "I can't answer that." "You already have." Allison immediately cut in. "Load it." The mover hesitated, then continued toward the truck. I took 3 photographs, one of the safe, one of the truck, one of the mover carrying it. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. "Megan." "I found Allison Green." "Already?" "She doesn't work for a moving company." "What does she do?" "She manages property transfers for investment firms." I frowned. Investment firms? Daniel, her voice changed. I need you to answer one question honestly. Go ahead. Did your son ever mention selling the house? Never. Renting it? No. Using it as collateral? No. She was silent. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. I don't think your son plans to live there. For a moment, I couldn't speak. What are you saying? I think someone intends to sell the property. I looked at the moving truck again. Suddenly, everything made sense. The furniture, the inventory, the photographs, the labels. They weren't moving into my home. They were emptying it, preparing it, for sale. I drove straight back to Megan's office. She already had several documents spread across her desk. One of them was Allison Green's business registration. Another listed several LLCs. Megan circled one name, Everstone Residential Holdings, LLC. Recognize it? No. It purchased 12 inherited homes in this county during the last 18 months. So, in every case, she slid another paper toward me. The sale happened less than 60 days after a disputed family ownership transfer. A cold feeling settled over the room. This wasn't random. No. It looks organized. Just then, Megan's assistant knocked on the door. Sorry to interrupt. What is it? A courier just dropped this off. She handed Megan a large envelope. No return address, only my name. Inside was a copy of the transfer agreement Evan had shown the police. This time I could read every page. Near the end was something I hadn't seen before. A second signature. Not mine. Not Evan's. I looked at the name. My heart skipped. Thomas Ralston, my former attorney. But there was one problem. According to the State Bar website, Thomas Ralston had officially retired 4 months before the date on that document. I read Thomas Ralston's signature 3 times. It didn't change. His name was still there. The date was still wrong. I looked at Megan. He was retired. Yes. So how could he witness this? He couldn't. She took the document from my hands and placed it beside the copy Evan had shown Officer Mills. Now we compare. For the next 20 minutes, neither of us spoke much. We weren't looking for dramatic evidence. We were looking for small mistakes. Those were usually the ones people missed. The first difference appeared on page 3. The margin spacing wasn't identical. Most people would never notice. Megan did. The formatting changed. So legal templates don't randomly change halfway through the same document. She opened another file from Thomas Ralston's office archives. This is one of his real property transfers from 3 years ago. She laid it beside mine. The font matches. The wording matches. But this page, she tapped the paper, was created using a different template. I leaned closer. The footer wasn't the same. Neither was the document identification code. Someone had copied most of the agreement and rebuilt the rest. My phone vibrated. Officer Mills. Mr. Mercer? Yes. I wanted to let you know we've added your statement to yesterday's report. I appreciate that. There is something else. What is it? I reviewed my body camera footage while finishing paperwork. And? I remembered you asking whether I would note that you disputed the signature immediately. I did. You were the only person who questioned the document. I wasn't sure why he was telling me that. Then he continued. Your son never once said he watched you sign it. Silence. He only kept saying, Officer Mills checked his notes. Everything was handled already. That wasn't proof, but it was another crack in the story. After lunch, Megan suggested we visit the county recorder's office. If the property was transferred, she said, I want to see every document that was actually recorded. The clerk printed the file. There were 4 recorded documents. The deed, the transfer affidavit, the tax declaration, and a trustee certification. Megan stopped reading. Daniel. What? You've never seen this, have you? She handed me the certification. It declared that I had resigned as the surviving trustee of the Mercer Family Trust, effective 61 days earlier. I stared at the signature. Again. It looked like mine. Again. I knew it wasn't. I never resigned. I believe you. She pointed to another line. This document says your resignation was accepted by... She stopped. I finished reading it myself. Successor trustee, Evan Mercer. My own son had become trustee, on paper. Without my knowledge. Back at her office, Megan called someone she trusted, a forensic document examiner. His name was Harold Benson. He had testified in court for more than 30 years. When he arrived, he didn't begin with the signatures. He started with the paper. That surprised me. He placed both documents under a magnifying lamp. Then he smiled. What? He looked at Megan. I don't think these pages came from the same printer. I frowned. You can tell that? Sometimes. He pointed toward tiny microscopic dots scattered across the page. Modern printers leave identifying patterns. He compared another sheet. This page was printed on one machine. The next page, he paused. On another. Megan folded her arms. So somebody assembled the agreement. Looks that way. Harold wasn't ready to say more, but the confidence in his voice was enough. At 5 o'clock, I checked my bank account. One transaction caught my attention immediately. 3 weeks earlier, someone had requested a certified copy of my trust. The fee had been paid using my checking account. I had never made that request. I called the bank. The representative confirmed the payment. It was authorized in person. In person? Yes. Who collected it? I'm sorry, I can't see that. But I can tell you which branch handled the transaction. It was the branch less than 2 miles from my house. The same branch where everyone knew me. I had not walked into that bank for nearly 4 months. As I ended the call, Megan looked up from her laptop. I've got something. She turned the screen toward me. Residential Asset Services wasn't just connected to Everstone Residential Holdings. It had handled more than 40 property transitions over the past 3 years. Most were ordinary. A few were not. In 6 different lawsuits, families claimed elderly homeowners had been pressured or deceived into giving up control of their homes. None of those cases ended with criminal charges, but several ended with confidential settlements. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't just about my house anymore. Someone had done this before. That evening, I drove back to the motel. The manager stopped me before I reached my room. Mr. Mercer? Yes? A gentleman left this for you. He handed me a small padded envelope. No return address. Inside was a single house key. Not my front door key. A smaller one. Attached to it was a handwritten note. They never found the second lockbox. Check the old workshop before they do. I turned the small brass key over in my hand. It was old. The edges were worn smooth from years of use. Not something you could buy at a hardware store last week. I looked at the note again. They never found the second lockbox. No signature, no explanation. Just 8 words. The motel manager shrugged. The man wouldn't give his name. What did he look like? Older than you. Did he say anything? He only asked if you were still staying here. And then? He handed me the envelope and left. I slipped the key into my pocket. Someone had been watching everything. The question was whether they were trying to help me or help themselves. The workshop sat behind the house, detached from the garage. I had built it with Linda the summer after we paid off the mortgage. Nobody knew that building better than I did. Or so I thought. I parked half a block away just after sunrise. The moving truck was gone. The house looked quiet. I walked behind a row of hedges until I reached the fence, separating my yard from Mr. Collins's property. He was already outside watering his tomatoes. He looked at me for a moment, then quietly walked over. I was wondering when you'd come. You saw what happened? I saw enough. He looked toward the workshop. They emptied most of it. Most. They couldn't get into one cabinet. That caught my attention. What cabinet? The old steel one. I hadn't thought about that cabinet in years. Linda used to laugh at me because I hid important things in places that looked completely ordinary. The safest hiding place, I'd tell her, is the one nobody thinks is hiding anything. She always rolled her eyes. Then she secretly started doing exactly the same thing. Mr. Collins reached into his pocket. I found this yesterday. He handed me a small folded piece of paper. It had fallen beside the fence. I unfolded it. It was an inventory checklist. Most items had check marks beside them. Dining table, grandfather clock, gun cabinet, bedroom furniture, workshop tools. Then one line was circled in red. Steel cabinet, locked, someone had written underneath. Return after locksmith arrives. I folded the paper carefully. They're coming back. Mr. Collins nodded. That's what I figured. I called Megan immediately. Don't go onto the property, she said before I finished explaining. I wasn't planning to. Good. But we need that cabinet. I know. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she asked, Daniel, who actually owns the workshop? I frowned. The workshop? Yes. It's part of the property. Are you sure? That was an odd question. I built it myself. I didn't ask who built it. She paused. I asked who owns it. 40 minutes later, she called back. Her voice sounded different, almost excited. I found the original survey. And? The workshop isn't attached to the parcel your son transferred. I stopped walking. What? The previous owner split the land decades ago. I don't understand. The house sits on parcel 14. The workshop, she took a breath, sits mostly on parcel 15. I closed my eyes. Parcel 15. I suddenly remembered. When Linda and I bought the property, the elderly owner refused to sell the extra strip of land. 2 years later, we bought it separately. Different closing, different deed, different parcel number. We never thought about it again. Megan continued. The transfer agreement only references parcel 14. What does that mean? It means, she spoke slowly, your son may believe he owns the workshop, but legally, he may not. For the first time in days. I smiled. That afternoon, Megan obtained an emergency court order preventing the removal of anything else from the property until ownership issues were reviewed. It wasn't a victory, but it bought us time. When the sheriff served the order, Evan called me less than 10 minutes later. You went to court? Yes. You froze everything. No. The judge did. You could have just talked to me. I tried. You called the police. After you locked me out. His breathing grew heavier. You're making this impossible. No, Evan, I said quietly. You made it impossible the day you packed my clothes while I was under anesthesia. He didn't answer. Instead, he asked something unexpected. Did someone contact you? My heart skipped. What do you mean? Nothing. No. You hesitated. So did you. Silence. Then he hung up. That one question stayed with me. Did someone contact you? He wasn't asking randomly. He was worried, which meant he believed someone else knew the truth. Late that evening, Harold Benson called. I finished another examination. What did you find? It isn't about the signatures. What then? The trustee certification. I waited. The paper itself. What about it? It wasn't manufactured until last year. I frowned. So? The document claims it was signed. He checked his notes. 3 years ago. The room became completely silent. Harold didn't need to explain. Paper manufactured last year. Couldn't possibly have been signed 3 years earlier. For the first time since this nightmare began, we had something much stronger than suspicion. We had physical evidence that at least one of the key legal documents had been created after the date printed on it. And that meant someone hadn't just bent the truth. Someone had manufactured it. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. One forged document didn't automatically mean I would get my house back. It meant something much more important. The story my son had been telling was beginning to fall apart. But I still didn't know one thing: whether he had built that story or simply believed it. The following morning, Megan filed an emergency motion. Not for ownership, for preservation of evidence. She wanted every original document, every electronic file, every notary record, and every communication connected to the transfer secured before anything disappeared. The judge granted the request that afternoon. It wasn't a final victory, but it stopped everyone from destroying records. Exactly what we needed. 2 days later, we sat in a conference room at the county courthouse. No jury, no dramatic speeches, just lawyers, boxes of documents, and a retired judge assigned to oversee mediation before trial. Across the table sat Evan. Beside him was an attorney I'd never met. The woman from Residential Asset Services wasn't there. Neither was anyone from Everstone Residential Holdings. That immediately caught Megan's attention. "They've disappeared," she whispered. "No." I looked across the room. "They've stepped back." She nodded. Because if fraud was about to be exposed, they wouldn't want their names anywhere near the case. The judge looked around the room. "Mr. Mercer." He looked at me. "Do you wish to begin?" I nodded. "I only want one thing." He waited. "I want to know how my son came to believe he owned my home." No accusations, no shouting, just one question. The judge looked at Evan. "Would you like to answer?" For almost 20 seconds, my son said nothing. Finally, he spoke. "I believe the documents were legitimate." Megan leaned forward. "Who prepared them?" "My attorney." "What attorney?" He looked toward the man sitting beside him. The attorney immediately interrupted. "My client will not answer questions regarding privileged communications." Megan smiled politely. "I wasn't asking about legal advice." She slid the trustee certification across the table. "I was asking who physically prepared this document." Silence. Harold Benson entered the room carrying a thin folder. He had been appointed by the court as an independent document examiner. The judge invited him forward. Harold didn't waste words. "The signatures require further forensic testing." He paused. "But I can state 3 things with reasonable professional certainty." Everyone in the room became still. First, he lifted the trustee certification. This paper could not have existed on the date printed here. He placed it down. Second, he picked up the transfer agreement. These pages were printed using at least 2 different printers. Another pause. And third, he looked directly at the judge. The notarization references an expired commission. The room became completely silent. Even Evan looked shocked. He turned slowly toward his attorney. "You told me everything had been verified." His attorney didn't answer. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. My son looked at me, not angrily, confused. "When did you find all this?" I answered honestly. "The day after you locked me out." "No," he shook his head. "I mean," his voice became quieter. "Who helped you?" There it was again, the same question. Not, How did you prove it? But who helped you? He believed someone from the other side had talked. Megan opened another folder. Your Honor, she handed several bank records to the judge. We subpoenaed payment records yesterday. The judge adjusted his glasses. What am I looking at? A consulting agreement? He read quietly, then looked toward Evan. The consulting company received $42,000. Megan nodded. 1 week before the locks were changed. She turned another page. The payment was authorized. She looked directly at my son. Using your electronic signature. Evan frowned. I never approved $42,000. You approved something. I signed invoices. Did you read them? No. The room fell silent again. I knew that answer. I had given the same one years earlier, when I trusted people I shouldn't have. The judge asked one final question. Mr. Mercer. He looked at Evan. Did anyone promise you financial benefit if the property transfer was completed? My son closed his eyes. For several long seconds he said nothing. When he finally answered, his voice had almost disappeared. They said, he swallowed. They said I could refinance the property, pay off my debts, and we would both be better off. I looked at him. Who said that? He slowly turned toward his own attorney. The attorney stood up immediately. My client will answer no further questions. But it was already too late. The judge had heard enough. That afternoon, the judge issued temporary orders. The transfer documents would remain under investigation. The house could not be sold. Nothing could be removed. No loans could be placed against it. And until the court reached a final decision, I was granted immediate access to my home. Not because ownership had been decided, but because the legal transfer itself was now in serious doubt. Officer Mills met us at the house that evening. A locksmith replaced the locks once again. This time, under a court order. I opened the front door. Everything smelled exactly the same. Linda's lavender candles, old wood, fresh coffee lingering from a machine someone had forgotten to turn off. I stood in the hallway without moving. Not because I had won, because I finally understood what hurt the most. It wasn't losing the house. It was realizing my own son had trusted strangers, more than the man who had spent his entire life protecting him. I stood in my living room for nearly a minute without saying a word. Officer Mills waited by the front door while the locksmith packed his tools. Neither of them rushed me. Neither of them said, "Congratulations," because everyone in that room understood the same thing. Getting back inside the house wasn't the ending. It was simply the first step toward rebuilding a life that had been broken. Nothing looked quite the same. The dining room was empty. The grandfather clock was gone. Linda's china cabinet had disappeared. Even the family photographs had been taken off the walls. Only the faded outlines remained where the frames had hung for years. The house felt familiar, and strangely unfamiliar at the same time. Like someone had erased parts of our lives one piece at a time. I walked into my study. The desk drawers had been opened. Every file cabinet had been searched. Folders sat in uneven stacks across the floor. Someone hadn't been looking for valuables. They had been looking for paperwork. Exactly what Linda had predicted years earlier. If anyone ever searches this house, she once told me, they won't be looking for jewelry. They'll be looking for signatures. At the time, I laughed. Now those words echoed through an almost empty room. The workshop remained locked. Officer Mills accompanied me there because the court order included every structure still under my legal control. The old steel cabinet stood exactly where Mr. Collins had said it would. The lock was untouched. I reached into my pocket and removed the small brass key from the anonymous envelope. It fit perfectly. The cabinet opened with a soft click. Inside were old tools, paint cans, boxes of screws, And, behind a removable wooden panel I had completely forgotten existed, a small gray lockbox. Linda had hidden it better than I ever could have. Megan arrived 20 minutes later. Together we opened the lockbox. Inside were only a few documents. Nothing dramatic, no secret fortune, no surprise deed, just carefully organized originals, the Mercer Family Trust, the original property surveys, our closing documents, Linda's handwritten notes, and one sealed envelope addressed simply, "For Evan." I looked at Megan. "I've never seen this. It hasn't been opened." The seal was still intact. I sat down on an old workbench before carefully breaking it. The letter was written in Linda's unmistakable handwriting. "Evan, if you're reading this, something has gone very wrong. Your father trusts people because that's the kind of man he is. I don't. That doesn't make me smarter. It only means I worry more than he does. If anyone ever convinces you that taking something from him is the same as protecting the family, stop. Ask one question. Who benefits the most if you stop trusting your father? If the answer isn't our family, walk away. Love always, Mom." When I finished reading, I folded the letter without saying anything. Megan quietly wiped a tear from her cheek. I simply placed the letter back into its envelope. 3 weeks later, the forensic investigation was completed. The results confirmed what Harold Benson had already suspected. Multiple legal documents had been assembled from different sources. The notarization was invalid. Several signatures required further criminal investigation. The court declared the property transfer unenforceable. Legally, the house had never left my ownership. The investment company disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. Several civil lawsuits were filed against businesses connected to residential asset services. I followed the news only long enough to know that investigators were asking many of the same questions we had asked weeks earlier. After that, I stopped paying attention. I had spent enough time looking backward. Evan called me one evening, for the first time since everything happened. He didn't ask for anything. I was wrong. I let the silence sit between us. I know saying that doesn't fix anything. No, it doesn't. I thought I was helping. I believe you. He began to cry, very quietly. I signed things without reading them. I closed my eyes. So did I. He stopped crying. What? I trusted people I shouldn't have. There was another long silence. Then I said the one thing I had spent weeks thinking about. You didn't lose me because of one signature. You lost me the day you stopped asking me questions. He asked if he could come by. I told him not yet. Not because I hated him, because trust grows slowly. And after being broken, it grows even slower. Over the next several months, I put the house back together. I found Linda's dining table at a local auction. The buyer had no idea where it came from. He sold it back to me for exactly what he had paid. Mr. Collins helped me reinstall the workshop cabinets. Mrs. Delaney surprised me one Saturday morning with flower boxes for the front porch. They made the house feel empty, she said. She was right. By spring, the porch looked like Linda would have wanted. People often ask whether I changed the locks again. I did, but not because I was afraid of my son. I changed them because every homeowner deserves to know who has a key to their own front door. Then I gave one spare key to Mr. Collins, another to Mrs. Delaney, people who had quietly stood beside me when they had nothing to gain. The last thing I did was return to the workshop. I placed Linda's letter back inside the lockbox, not because I wanted to hide it, but because some lessons shouldn't be discovered until we're ready to understand them. Every now and then, I unlock that cabinet and read her words again. Not to remember the betrayal, but to remember the woman who saw danger long before I did, and loved our family enough to leave behind the truth instead of revenge. That house is still mine. The deed says so, The court says so. But that's not what matters most. What matters is that I finally learned something Linda understood all along. A home isn't protected by walls. It's protected by the people you can still trust once every lock has been changed.